Welcome to our Primary Engineer, If You Were an Engineer, What Would You Do webinar. I'm Yana Gatisha, the Operations Manager of the Education Programme at the IMechE, and it's my pleasure to host the second IMechE Education Team webinar. Today's session will involve a panel discussion with Primary Engineer and guests, to whom you will be introduced to shortly. This year marks the 10-year anniversary of the IMechE supporting the Primary Engineer Programme. Our relationship with Primary Engineer has grown and developed from the institution initially supporting a number of smaller programs on a relatively ad hoc basis to collaboration with the Tomorrow Engineers group, and finally partnership with the aim of engaging young people with engineering and utilising the IMechE's membership. The IMechE continues to support all of the initiatives which now sit under the Primary Engineer Programme, which has gone from strength to strength and today engages tens of thousands of children across the country. The primary focus of today's webinar will be the If You Were an Engineer, What Would You Do STEM project. We will learn more about the programme, let you know how you can get involved and hear from IMechE members and learn about their own experience of Primary Engineer. Before we begin, I would like to let you know that the webinar is being recorded in its entirety and will be available on demand thereafter, should you wish to revisit any of the content. If you have any questions or comments you wish to make, kindly type them in the chat box and we will answer questions at the end of the webinar in the dedicated Q&A session, and we welcome your input. I would now like to pass on to Scurlock, the founder of Primary Engineer.
Well, hello everybody. Hello from my kitchen in Great Hartwood, which is just down the road from our office in Burnley. You may have noticed that on the invitation today, we talked about inclusion and diversity, and you may be sat there thinking, that's a panel of women. But actually what we were looking at was there's International Women's Day, there's International Women in Engineering Day, and they're days. And we're doing this full time. So I think having a panel of women talking about diversity and inclusion at any time is actually a valid point. So I hope you'll join us with that thought. My role at Primary Engineer, I founded Primary Engineer, and in the opening part of this programme, I'm just going to give you a little bit of background as to who we are and what we do, just in case you don't know us or you haven't come across us. So we started in 2005, and we started actually with 2 secondary schools and 13 primary schools. And the idea was to train teachers to be able to deliver confidently engineering in the classroom. And at that point, we didn't actually involve engineers, oddly. I don't think we knew very many of them, but we didn't involve engineers. And I can remember vividly the first time that we had an engineer involved. It was actually a gentleman who you may know called Andrew Med, who is based up in Lancashire, and he came and was a judge for us at our very first celebration event. If you think about that's where we started, and you fast forward to today, the focus is still on teacher training, and the reason that we focus on teacher training is that they will work with all their children in the classroom. And it's that everybody engaged, the children at the back of the class, the children at the front of the class. We're not a club. We're not interested in being a club. We're interested in making sure that every child gets the opportunity to engage in an engineering activity that's curriculum linked, that the teacher can lead, and that in the best case scenario, there's an engineer close by. So when we do our training courses now, we invite engineers to sit alongside the teachers on those training days to get to know them. And if you think about it, more often than not, when you go into a school to do an activity with a teacher in a classroom, you haven't met the teacher potentially outside of that classroom. So spending a day working through a project and the training with a teacher allows the engineer to build that rapport, get to know them, get to understand where their insecurities might be, where their knowledge gaps might be, and where their expertise is, so that when they go into the classroom, they can really drive and be the context for engineering for all the children. We developed projects. Now we have probably about a dozen courses. We have rail, we have automotive courses for children or for teachers that children can then take part in the activities. We also have a master's level course where teachers can look at developing engineering strategies and skills and then do action research to look at the impact of them. And that involves teachers engaging with engineers understanding their skill sets, understanding their strategies, understanding their career paths. So it's about broadening that knowledge base for teachers to be able to influence more and more children. Within all of that, one thing that really did come to mind was that engineering is so diverse. There is so many different types of engineers, so many different industries and sectors. It's very hard to say what an engineer does. So if you're a teacher and you're trying to impart that knowledge, where do you start? So we started thinking about how do we get more engineers to engage with children. And the way that we came up with doing it was to come up with a project it was originally called the Leaders Award, and we're kind of moving it over more to be, if you were an engineer, what would you do? But basically ask the question of children, okay, so if you were an engineer, what would you do? To do the project, you have to interview an engineer. And the thing I liked about that was that we encouraged engineers to do a presentation online or face-to-face. The thing that's really cool about that is that the kids ask the questions that matter to them. So not the questions that we think are important, it's the questions that children think are important. They do the interviews, teachers in the background, everybody gets more information, more knowledge about career paths and what engineering is. And then the children have to go away, find a problem, draw a solution to it, because you don't want to get into the build and the make and the materials and the time. So draw a solution to it, annotate it, and then write a letter saying why an engineer should build it. And the project's grown and grown. It's grown from, I think the first year we had about 3,800 entries. Our best year before COVID, we reached over 50,000. In COVID, we reached 30,000. And the diversity is a very, very clear 50-50 gender split. We have children as young as 3 and 4. So we have early years engineer anyway, but we still have children as young as 3 and 4 taking part in this competition. When we get the entries in, we grade them. So we invite engineers to come along and grade the entries. So every child knows an engineer is going to read their idea, and that's an inspiration for children, because it's not the teacher that's going to give them a grade, if you like. It's an engineer. That makes a difference to a child. So we get the entries in, we take the entries out, we get them graded. Every child gets a certificate, every child gets a grade. And then we have judging panels, and we award 2 winners per year group, per region. And that's not based on gender. That's actually based on the best idea. We then have exhibitions, and at those exhibitions, or just before those exhibitions, our university partners choose designs to build. And this is where the proto teams come in, and they take away the idea, they build it, they interact with the child is a client, we're a client, they blog, and they share that story. Again, all around that inspiration piece. And at the following exhibitions, when we can have exhibitions again, they unveil the work that the proto teams have done. So the competition it's just grown and grown. And it's a lovely competition because, as I say, it's open to everybody. In the wider things that we do, we also came up with a project called Stat Wars, which is something that Naz, one of our panelists, has been involved in actually looking at data. And we looked at the skill sets that children were engaging with, and we figured that actually data seems to be one that's missing, other than an Excel graph. And in the year of COVID, where everything's been very, very data driven, we decided to look at if we could design a project, and we called it Stat Wars. So obviously, if you're involved, you're a stat warrior. It was to look at data-driven decisions. So could you use data to find 3 things that you could personally change in your daily life to have a positive impact on climate change? So we've got these different projects where we bring in different aspects of engineering or different skill sets, but they all fit together quite neatly around this engineering bubble. So what we've done today is that we've looked at bringing together people from different sectors of our programs, or certainly with the Leaders Award, who've been involved in different ways. And the idea is to just pose a couple of questions. We'll look to answer your questions in the second part of the session. But to start the ball rolling, we'll answer some questions between us on the panel. So my first joyous task is to introduce each of our panelists and just ask them to say a little bit about themselves and how they're involved more widely with primary engineer. And then we'll look at the Leaders Award as the kind of the next step. So Lydia, please, can I introduce you?
Hello. Well, really lovely to be here today and not know how many people I'm speaking to. It definitely makes me more comfortable not to know. So my name's Lydia Fairman. I work for Network Rail and I'm the lead capability and development manager. So I've got a team of people who I work with, who we work with graduates, developing graduate schemes, but actually an awful lot of our work is our STEM education program, going out and working with children in schools to try to encourage them to take the right subjects so that they'll come and join rail in the long run. We've been involved with primary engineer now. This is the end of our second year that we'll be reaching at the end of this next academic year. And we were inspired by Hitachi to sign up to primary engineer. I remember meeting Pete in a room a couple of years ago talking about the rail project. So we decided to go full whammy straight away, and we've gone national with 3 of the programs, and we support the rail project. So in 8 different locations around the country, we're working with schools to do some competing in terms of train design. Then we also supported Stat Wars this year, and Susan actually inspired us to take up Stat Wars. And for us, that's been a really brilliant competition because getting across the mathematics, and some of our data scientists really have been desperate to get involved in our STEM projects, and Stat Wars has allowed us to do that in a more creative way. So we've really been enjoying doing that. And then finally, the Leaders Award, or if you were an engineer, what would you do competition. And again, for me, that's been a really special competition to get involved with. And I know we'll have the opportunity to talk a bit more later, but in terms of our engineers and our creative people being able to talk about how they're inspired by problem solving, it's been a really good platform to have some creative conversations in that context. And although we've only been able to work virtually so far, I think we've had an incredible year in the last year. We've managed to reach an awful lot of children, and people I think have been able to get involved that wouldn't have anticipated it because of the virtual kind of platform. So that's what we've been doing so far.
Oh, fabulous. Thanks, Lydia. Naz, would you like to follow on?
Hi everybody, I'm Naziyah Mahmood and I'm a bit of a jill of all trades. So I'm an astrophysicist and aerospace engineer, and I'm currently the Earth Intelligence GNSS sales engineer for Spire Global, which is an end-to-end space service provider and a data analytics organisation. I'm also a second round Space for Humanity citizen astronaut candidate. I'm a women's rights activist and I work very closely with organisations such as the YWCA Scotland, the First Minister's National Advisory Council for, on Women and Girls, the WES, and I was the previous equalities expert for Scottish engineering. So I first had the pleasure of actually being introduced to Susan during my days as a STEM development manager at the City of Glasgow College. And then we also worked quite closely when I was working at Scottish Engineering. So Scottish Engineering and Primary Engineer have a very close relationship, and Scottish Engineering itself, being a members organisation, works to promote STEM activities across Scotland in several different kinds of ways. They are basically also highlighting the many different paths that young people can take to get into the STEM field. So it's not always having to be that very stereotypical route of, you know, going through university. This could be through apprenticeships. It could be through different kinds of other courses, which is fantastic. And one of the aspects that I really loved about getting involved with Primary Engineer was as a stat warrior. So I got involved in the Stat Wars program, and what I really loved about that was the interest that you get from the children watching when they realize that, yes, an engineer, a scientist doesn't always look like that stereotypical image they have on their head, you know, of like a grey-haired, curly-haired man, good old Uncle Albert, of course. But basically, it makes it more relatable, which I think is incredibly important when we're speaking to younger generations. You know, they don't need to be shown people who, although might seem inspirational, but can seem like they're a million miles away. You know, it's about letting them know that this is somebody who was practically in your shoes, you know, when they were younger. So, and that's one of the things I really love about joining up with Primary Engineer. And at the risk of me rambling on too much, I'll just hush now and pass it along. But yeah, looking forward to this chat.
Thanks, Naz. I still think you've got the best job title in the world. Can I introduce Lucy?
Hiya, yes, you can. And yeah, follow that job title. Mine's not anywhere near as interesting, I'm afraid. I'm Lucy Jones, and I'm the Vice Dean of the Faculty of Science, Engineering and Computing at Kingston University, London. And I'm also the university's Gender Equality Champion and Director of STEM Outreach. So you can kind of see where I'm coming from in this programme. We've been the London partner now for the If You Were an Engineer, What Would You Do competition for a few years. And we were also delighted a couple of years ago to be asked to adopt Jersey. I'm quite proud of having adopted Jersey because Jersey didn't have a local university. So we've also supported them in that competition over the last couple of years. We also support some of the other initiatives in terms of working with the primary schools. And are absolutely delighted to have been able to be part of the programme. The best part for us is about some of the prototype working, but I'll talk to you about that in a lot more detail in the next part. So thanks, guys.
Thanks, Lucy. Sarah?
Yes, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Susan. My name's Sarah Haslam. I work for Ford Motor Company. I'm a chief engineer within our powertrain engineering team, and I'm responsible for engine development within Europe. But I'm also a fellow of the IMechE and have been a trustee on the board as well in prior years. And really, that's how I came to find out about primary engineer and all the great things about it. And it didn't take me long at all to realise the benefits of this programme. And I basically championed it and took it to Ford and got the senior directorship team on board to support this programme. And that was about 5 years ago. So I've been the champion for the primary engineer into the schools, working with our local community. And that's been a great success over the last 5 years. And we've been able to have a really big impact in the local community. And, you know, for Ford as well, it's been great that we were able to host some of the training and the celebration days at our product development site in Essex. So that's also been something we've been able to engage with as part of the scheme. And moving on to the Leaders Award, yes, again, we see this as a great opportunity to interact with the children at a really young age and really engage and, you know, and really have that interaction with engineers. I think that appeals to children. As Susan mentioned earlier, they know that they're speaking directly with a real engineer, gives them that profile, it gives them that inspiration to see those role models and what it could be like to be an engineer.
Thanks, Sarah. I remember that I think there was an occasion not long ago when we had teachers on sites being trained at Ford and we couldn't get them off again. They got so involved in having a look around and seeing what was going on. And that for me is a really key bit, you know, for teachers to take away as much as they can from the training days where they're in that environment.
Absolutely, giving them that insight. We gave them a site tour, showed them our test facilities and what we really do, what it takes to design and build a vehicle. And yeah, absolutely gave them complete insight into the world of engineering, which of course they will take away with them and talk to kids in the future about as well. It's a win-win situation for everybody.
Yeah, there's always a lot of arguing in the office as to who goes down in the companies on some of these sites as well. Lydia, would you like to share a little bit about the If You Were an Engineer, What Would You Do competition and how you've been involved or what you've seen? Any stories or insights you can share, please?
Yeah, absolutely. It is probably one of my favourite STEM campaigns that we've been involved with because one of the things I think is really important with this work is that role model piece, but it's the lived stories and lived experiences. And I think for us on both sides, when we're trying to get kids interested and involved and excited, it helps. And then when we're trying to get our STEM ambassadors interested and involved and excited, it really helps us to get that uptake. So there's a couple of experiences I had with the award in particular. One was actually judging. In fact, just before we signed up, I had the opportunity to sit as a judge in Lincolnshire, where I'm actually from a small town in Boston, in Lincolnshire, which is in the middle of nowhere, completely on the east coast of the country. And there were two children who I had the opportunity to meet who had become really inspired by this, working with engineers and getting excited. And I learned afterwards that their school had actually been pulled out of Ofsted because the children had become so involved and engaged in the project that it had pulled them out of, they were children who were having trouble, and it had pulled them out of that and got them engaged in school and got them interested. But also, as we were signing up, we had this brilliant entry which came from, I think, a 4 or 5-year-old child in reception class who designed a robotic ramp. And you think it would be life-changing for all of us when we're travelling on the railway. You're sitting in your carriage and you want to call the ramp to come and get you off the train if you're using a wheelchair, and it would automatically get to the carriage that you were sitting on. And this little child had done brilliant drawings, and we were actually able to bring him into a train simulator, and he had a day before COVID. It was all luckily just before COVID, where he had a day with our Southern route with his parents driving trains in a simulator. So for us, those kind of experiences have been really inspiring, and they help me then to go and speak to my chairman and my chief executive about the impact that we're having on young people's lives, and it's terrific, really. The other thing I see that's a fantastic opportunity with this competition in particular is the bridge that it builds between school and college or university or apprenticeships, and that link to universities making the prototypes, I think, so important when we're looking at STEM engagement, because we know sometimes we push young people to make the choices and they go and study the courses, but they don't always then come and join the industry or commit. So I think building those bridges is so important in this work.
I think there's a big piece, isn't there, about getting kids to understand what they're actually joining. As you say, like engineering sounds like a great idea, but unless you know more about it, by the time you get there to study the course, it might not be the thing that you think it's going to be. So the more information you give them sooner, the better.
Yeah, that unknown space is the most exciting space. And if we can get the right models, the right role models in front of children talking about those huge problems, we've got fantastic problems to solve in rail. And that's what engineers are there to do.
I love that. I love the way that the kids really engage with it, though, as well. They really rise to the challenge. If when an engineer's talking to children about things that they experience, problems in their sector, the left of field thinking is quite remarkable. It's a joy to see, I think.
Yeah, and those judging sessions, they're actually brilliant team building sessions. I mean, that was when we've done them virtually this year. We did them within our teams and we worked through, it was brilliant looking at all the entries, really uplifting. It feels like fulfilling work.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Thank you. Naz, do you have any kind of experiences that you can share?
Yes, so this is probably going to take a slightly different angle, but one of the more kind of eye-opening experiences I had after taking part in the Stat Wars program was actually from the parents. So I had somebody get in touch with me who had watched the video, I think because it was also posted to YouTube, I believe. And the parent basically said, that they really enjoyed watching this alongside their children, and it was quite eye-opening to them. So one thing I often talk about is how important it is to normalize diversity within all of its different spectrums within the STEM fields. And what we're finding is that with young children, no child is born with this bias. This is something that's kind of pushed into them as they grow older. But so with a lot of these children who are watching, they might often just see an engineer. It's not a case of, this is a female engineer or a person of color engineer or a person of faith engineer, disabilities, whatever, and yet the parent is noticing that more because that inherent bias has been built up in them a bit longer. But that in itself was a form of training that they can then work upon so that they can make that journey for their child better. And one of the biggest influences, as we know, when it comes to a child's growth, is their teachers. But it's also out with school, their parents. That is their first teacher in a sense. So if an organisation like Primary Engineer is able to obviously primarily help develop the minds and growth of these children, but it's also helping the parents involved, then that's incredible. That's really, really important. So as I was saying earlier, it's important to make sure that those that they're watching are relatable. I don't want to sit here giving a talk to these kids, talking as though this is something that's, a once in a lifetime, only 1 in a million people can do, nothing like that. It's to help them realize that this is something, if they are interested in, they can get into. And then there's the aspect of representation, and then of course normalization, just like I said as well. And what I found was those kind of programs like Stat Wars really helped to bring all of that together.
Thanks, Naz. It's interesting when you talk about the parents' engagement and the parents got in contact with you. I think it's often seen as the holy grail of, how do you get all the influencers influencing at the right points and at the right time? And one thing I can remember from one of the exhibitions that we had for Leaders Award was a parent going up to the entry that's displayed, and it's obviously their child's entry. And I can vividly recall him turning around to the kid and just saying, "Blimey, you could be an engineer." And it was like out of nowhere, but obviously the parents had never considered that was an option until they'd seen this idea that they'd come up with. And it was a real kind of, oh, that's interesting.
So exactly, just like you're saying, seeing that reaction from whether it's a teacher or whether it's a parent is something that's really going to boost the morale of any child wanting to originally go into these sectors as it is. But another part of the program, which was incredible, was the questions. And just as Lydia was saying earlier as well, that sense of innovation. And one of the most important parts of being an engineer or a scientist or just anyone within the STEM field is having a sense of creativity. Innovation is what drives this sector because it's always really fast-paced, very changing all the time, and you have to keep global competitiveness. So having these fresh viewpoints from the younger audiences is incredible.
Oh, that's lovely. Thank you. Lucy, what's your experiences then?
Oh, well, we get the really fun bit of prototyping. And turning those fabulous ideas that the children have generated into something really tangible that we can take back out into the schools and to exhibitions and actually really work with the whole class that child has been part of. And that's been a fabulous experience. We've now been engaged in making prototypes for a number of years, and we've done some amazing stuff. We started off with a trampoline that you could use to charge your mobile phone. There is somewhere on YouTube a very embarrassing video of me demonstrating how that works. I will never do that one again. We've then moved on to a water-sucking bicycle, which was absolutely phenomenal. And this year we're doing some work looking at a indicator system for children who are riding bicycles so that they can very easily indicate to traffic where they're going to be. And actually, in a way, what you're making is immaterial. It doesn't matter. It's the process. It's what these kids are part of, which is that whole design, tweaking that design, going back, reflecting on what they've done, and actually helping to work with our engineers and our proto teams who are turning that sketch on a piece of paper into something real. And the faces of the children when they get to see those prototypes in reality is absolutely precious. Really, really precious. And it's not just for the individual child. As I've said, the whole class becomes involved. The engineers go back, they talk to the classes where these children are part of, talk about where they are and how they've actually made the journey from that piece of paper to the prototype. But the other benefit for me from a university point of view, or from a slightly selfish point of view, is the knock-on benefits that it has to the university community. Because we engage our undergraduate students in doing some of this project work. They work alongside my technical team to generate the prototypes. But we also engage PhD students and early career researchers as part of the judging team. And it creates a whole buzz and a sense of excitement. And it's really, really amazing to see how these students respond to actually working as experts, supporting these younger children. There's a great peer learning piece that goes on as well. And we find that year on year, there are more and more of the students who are wanting to get involved and wanting to be engaged because they're hearing from previous cohorts of students just how fabulous and enriching the whole process has been for them. So for me, it's a no-brainer. It's a start-to-end process, and we are just I'm so delighted to be part of it.
Well, that's lovely. Thank you, Lucy. I think the joy is seeing the end results and then understanding the story behind some of the things that have been designed and built. And it's always, for me, it's always inspiring that the children design things to help other people. You know, it's not money-making machines or perpetual beauty machines. It is something that's going to make somebody else's life better. I can't completely apply that to the trampoline that would charge your phone, but I can to the other ones that you've built for years. But that to me is the bit that I think makes everybody's heart soar. It's just how caring kids are.
Absolutely. And actually, you know, that's really evident as when you're part of the judging panel and you're looking at the number of designs and solutions that are very, very personal to that child. And sometimes the stories are heartbreaking. They really are. I've sat on panels where people have sobbed. But that, again, is part of the joy of being part of this. And for that child to take something that is so real to them and come up with a tangible solution is something that's really valuable and a great life lesson.
Oh, lovely. Thank you, Lucy. Sarah, what's your experiences been? She says, grinning.
Well, I'd just like to sort of add to Lucy's comments. I mean, what Lucy's describing there is brilliant, isn't it? That seeing those entries coming in like that and the impact they have on the children, I think it's brilliant. And it is about improving the world through engineering and science, right? Which is what we want to do and you get encouraged by. For me personally, I think I'd like to come back to my experience about being interviewed. And obviously I gave you a little pitch about my role within Ford. And, you know, touching on what you said before, Susan, you know, the gender split that's 50-50 is great. You know, we definitely need more children encouraged into STEM, but also from a female point of view, especially in the automotive industry, we do suffer, unfortunately, as one of the worst sort of industries that women generally are interested in getting involved in. So I think for me, it was great to know that the audience had that split and I could really reach out to some of those young girls, I should say, young girls. And, you know, just having that interaction, giving them the role model. And I got asked lots of great questions at the end of my interview. The usual ones, you know, what car do you drive? What car would you like to drive? You know, how many parts are there in an engine? You know, what's the best thing about your job? But I have to say, for me, you know, the best question that I got asked, and I really had to keep a straight face, was, do I have to manage a lot of men? And is it fun to manage a lot of men? So, of course, inside of me, I knew exactly how I wanted to respond to this question, but I managed to keep a straight face and give a very diplomatic, diverse response about how important it is to manage everybody in my team. But that was a really interesting insight to hear that from a young girl about how she thought maybe it would be like to manage a group of men, a team of men. And yeah, I found that probably one of the best questions that I had, Susan. I think that was made it for me.
I must admit, you know, it made me giggle because I was sitting into that interview. I remember watching that as it was going out live. The thing I think I said at the beginning of this process was that when kids interview engineers, they ask the questions that are important to them. And, you know, that is a question that was important to somebody. We've had other strange questions that are important, like, where do you go for your lunch? And, you know, is there a bell to tell you to go to lunch? And it's these strange kind of random things that you would never think that's a serious question that we should address. But it is in that kid's mind, and that's going to make the difference, you know, randomly. That will make a difference in choices later on. Well, thank you for that, Sarah. That's a nice insight. Thank you. So the last part of the panel session is just looking at the diversity and inclusion piece and how that's reflected in either through the program, what you've seen in the program, or how that's reflected in your organisations and how that's deployed with the engagement STEM ambassadors that you might have. So it's just rounding off really. So Lydia, have you any thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, this is, I think, one of the most incredible impacts that we have the opportunity to make really in this space. I'm very lucky to work for a company like Network Rail, where this is such an integral part of the work that we do, and we are pushed on a daily basis to consider all of these issues and how can we be more diverse and how can we retain the diversity when we manage to attract it. So it's not just about being diverse, but it's about being inclusive. And we have many an argument, I think, about if you are inclusive, then you'll be diverse, but if you're not diverse. So we're always going around in these circles. And when I first joined the company about 4.5, 5 years ago, I was immediately tasked with how can we get more females onto our engineering graduate scheme. So I did an awful lot of work in that space. One of those things, those unanswerable things is the relatability of role models. How can we make sure that young people are meeting people that they can relate to? And that certainly applies in all facets of diversity when you're looking at any kind of area. If children can meet somebody that has something that they can relate to, and they can just think, oh yeah, I could do that. Then even growing up as a young girl, I was pushed down the arts route. My sister was pushed down the arts route and the boys were pushed down the maths route. So you see these typical kind of stereotypical paths being created. And then in less easy to reach places in the country. And that's one of the things, or one of the reasons that this has so appealed to me, because I did grow up in the middle of nowhere, kind of comparatively for the UK, and the opportunities aren't visible. So if employers don't make the effort to go and reach harder to reach schools, show them the diversity of role models that they can meet, talk to them about the diversity of opportunity, but also the flexibility that comes. We're incredibly lucky in rail that we've probably got something for everybody. And a couple of years ago, we did some research which was throwing out some of those questions you were talking about a minute ago. You know, the questions you'd never consider that young people, they're desperate to know the answers to. But it also told us a lot about the perception of the railway sector among young people 14 upwards. And one of the biggest things that we found was that we're actually not perceived because we're not seen. And children have created an understanding of what they believe rail to be by what they can see. And that's tickets or driving a train, possibly being on the track fixing a train. And they can't see all of these incredible hidden roles that we've got, or incredible hidden people. Our track side workforce, you can look at some of them. I think there's 17 women to 5,000 men in one of our trackside workforces. So we also have the other elements of how do we make that, and we've done an awful lot of work in this space, how do we make that working environment feasible for anybody to be able to work in? So portable loos on the vans so that track workers have got all the facilities that they need. It sounds like a very simple thing, but by doing that as an organisation, we're able to increase the number of women that we can employ, and then the number of those role models increases too. So I'm able to directly support our Everyone Matters policy, where we talk about race or gender or sexuality, and the statistics we get through from you guys really help us with that in terms of being able to see the demography of the schools, where they are, what the makeup of children is. And then we get our STEM ambassadors to try to reflect the kind of aims and aspirations we've got in that area too. So it's a massive, massive part of the work we do in this space.
It's really interesting what you say about that kids have constructed what they think rail is and what Network Rail is. But actually, what goes on behind is this enormous opportunity that they just don't see at all. I remember we had a conversation about beekeepers at one point, and you know, just things that you would never assume would sit in that sphere are part of that story. It's enormous. We
have got some incredible roles that you just wouldn't know. We own cattle, you know, we've got all the pollination strategies, and you know, when you start getting into weather and climate, I'm not a scientist by any means, but you start thinking, why isn't my train going quickly enough on a really hot day? And then you look at the impact of heat on metal, and then you look at the way that we've laid rails and all of those things. When you start talking to children about those problems, we've got an activity that is leads on the line. So it's an incredible way of inspiring them, and we've got so many roles you can't see. You can only see a tiny proportion of them.
Yeah, and that's the nice bit about being able to use those different diverse careers within the competition, because it's broadening experience. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely.
Naz, have you got any thoughts?
Too many probably, but to summarize them, yes, one thing I do like to point out, and often it can be quite the elephant in the room when you're speaking to different organizations, is often equality, diversity, and inclusion, and also bringing in that hidden eye of intersectionality it's often seen as a luxury when it comes to a lot of engineering organization. It's seen as something you can do on the side, some form of like 40-minute online training you do, and you get given a digital badge which you stick on your email signature, and suddenly you're the most inclusive and equal person that there is. Unfortunately, that's not really how it should work. But I'm a STEM ambassador, and I with a specific focus on gender, but also minority ethnic groups as well. But also during my time at Scottish Engineering as their equalities expert, I delivered equalities training to engineering companies across Scotland, and majority of these were SME companies. So SMEs constitute approximately 99.6% of engineering companies in Scotland, and I believe over the UK it's about 99.3%. So this is where the majority of our engineers, scientists and such will be. Now, if the leadership within these organizations always tends to look the same, they tend to have the same way of thinking, they tend to have the same kind of policies, it will be difficult to shift policies and different ways of thinking and behaviors unless that changes. And what I'm finding is more and more organizations are now stepping forward and realizing that this, the type of training you can get on equality, diversity and inclusion isn't just something like a badge or something extra to make themselves look good. It is mandatory. If you as an organization want to succeed, you have to have an ED&I policy. You have to have training, whether it's unconscious bias training, whether it's recruitment training, and it goes on. And the reason that also comes up is because keep in mind that these people will also be parents, they will be also influencing their own children as well going home. So when you have organizations like Primary Engineer walking in and showing these young people that being within the sector has such a diverse appearance in a way, and just as Lydia was saying as well, it creates a sense of relatability. And it helps them to realize that there are so many more different angles you can really take to enter into the engineering field as well. And one of the things that I think is incredibly important is people often tend to look to attract in diversity, but there's no point of attracting in a diverse way if you can't retain that diversity. So the amount of effort that really needs to go into retain it is just as important. The equalities and diversity are great, but inclusion is needed just as much. They go hand in hand. So when we're talking about young people, yes, it's great to show them these are examples of people out there who are doing these jobs and such, but to also allow them to realize that there are initiatives out there that can support you if you are maybe part of a specific protected characteristic, or if you have a specific type of need, that this is available is really important. And with the work that Primary Engineer does, that helps to highlight a lot of that, I think. So it works really well, I believe.
Thanks very much, Naz. That's really insightful. Lucy?
Yeah, I think if I'll come at it from a slightly different angle, from a sort of just from a STEM outreach champion type point of view. And at the university, we engage in a number of different schemes, of which Primary Engineer is of course the best one. I couldn't say anything else here, could I? It's the best. But it does come back to what Susan was talking about right at the beginning of this session, which is that the joy with the if you were an engineer, what would you do competition, is that it involves the whole class. That is the crux of this. So the whole class there, you've got a peer group who are working together on a shared project. It's a shared experience. And by that very nature, you're already building in that equality of experience across the piece for all of those children in the class. And actually what the Primary Engineer competition also does is it creates a sustainability, because children, as they move up through primary school and into secondary school, can still take part in the competition. And I've sat on panels now looking at schools across London where we're seeing the same names cropping up that I've now seen 3 times because they've done it for 3 years in a row. And that's fabulous, because they're growing in the sophistication of their thinking, but they're growing as a cohort. And actually that whole core of that activity then is focused around still the whole class. And when they're coming to award ceremonies, you've got younger children who are seeing children 3, 4, 5 years older than them, but still with this same gender mix, still that whole class approach. And actually seeing that, they can, when they move up through the school, when they become big kids, they can still take part, they can still succeed, and they can still have an impact within this whole engineering sphere. And I think it's also that sustainability around EDI, which I think is really important.
So it's an interesting thought what you were saying about doing it year on year, is that it's very rare you get a project you can revisit.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's closed off. You've done that, right? Let's get it in the bag, let's move on. But this one you can come back with another idea and you build on those skill sets to be able to develop those ideas. So really,
I have found myself at one of the exhibitions being grilled by a young child and their parents about what they could do to improve to make sure they got another prize next year. And I think, but it was nice to see that they were already thinking about growing on the experience that they'd had.
Yeah, no, lovely. Sarah, would you like to close off this part of the session?
Yeah, sure. And, lots of great comments from the other panelists. So that's always the danger of going last, right? But I think from a Ford perspective, I would say, this fits in really nicely to the whole scope of STEM projects that we get involved in. So as you can imagine, Ford does get approached by many organisations asking for support and engagement and funding. But for Ford, this one sat in very nicely. We're trying to ensure we've got that pipeline of engineers coming through to us for the future. And so even going back to this young age, we still see the importance of targeting children at this young age before the stereotypical images get set in their heads, and just engaging them in a fun way just will put them on that path that we need them to go forward through and pop out the other end as trained as engineering students that we can then take on board. So I think that's the only other comment that I can really add, Susan, how it just really nicely fitted into our whole STEM programme by targeting a particular area and age of children.
Oh, that's lovely. Thank you. I believe that we are going to now have a poll for the people that are listening. And I think that's going to be managed beautifully by Natalie, I believe. So can we ask poll to audience? I think that's what okay. I'm just going to give you a minute or two to just answer the question, please. And obviously we'll be devastated if it's anything other than brilliant. I think that carries on in the background, and we can take any questions that you'd like to post, so we can pass those round. Whilst that's in process, if you do want to get involved with us and you'd like to know more about what's going on and where things are happening, then please just visit our primary engineer website and join via the engineer how to get involved page, really. So just send us a register there and we'll get in contact with you, send you newsletters. Don't worry about how much time you've got available. As you'll have heard, we've got different projects from different groups that you can have an hour being interviewed, or you can spend a day training, or you can spend more days going into schools and helping the teachers and the children with their projects. I think that just while questions are coming in, I think one of the things that's really interesting about the discussion has been it's the journey that children are going through, the journey of being inspired by a diverse group of engineers, which enables them to see the different careers that are available to them in these amazing industries, on these amazing sites. But it's also, as Naz said, about keeping them and making sure that, as Lydia said, that the careers, that the courses that they're taking are the courses that they expect rather than they think. And those are the kind of the important bits that I've taken away from it at the moment. I'm not sure if we've got... Oh, it's a long question.
I think this is more of a potential partnership one you may wish to consider separately, Susan.
Okay.
And I would invite attendees to please utilise this opportunity and to ask away if you do have any questions.
I think one of my most favourite inventions, which I will share seeing as we're waiting for questions, and I would throw this at Lucy because I'm desperate for somebody to make it Lucy, is a young child of around about 4 years old had been visited by somebody from Thales Obstetrics in Glasgow. And so every entry that we receive has the name of the engineer on it that has inspired the invention, which is really cool because it allows us to see how it's impacted on the idea. And this child had invented a radio with a prism on the top that sprayed water through it so that you could dance under rainbows. Lucy, I really want one. Really want one.
I think you've mentioned this to me before, Susan, about 10 times. So at one point, I will listen and I'll give you an engineer to make a rainbow you can dance under.
Thank you very much. There was another one which would probably Naz will probably appreciate, which was a satellite to deflect sunlight onto Scotland to cure rickets.
I do love that one. We do. Yeah. We are a little bit more vitamin D deficient over here, so I'll look into that one.
The beauty of them is just that quite often it's the way that children try and cure other people's problems, and one of our great successes is the Proto team over at UPlan that invented the spinal muscular atrophy jacket for children, which basically was designed by a child in Burnley for her cousin who has the illness. And UPlan thought, there'll be loads of them, but when they actually investigated it, they found there wasn't. And over the last 3 years, it's now turned into an actual product that will actually change lives. And I think, that's a kind of a drop the mic moment, really, when you see things like that children and partners have developed. I'm not sure if, sorry?
I was about to say, I had a really quick question for Lucy. Would we be able to get access to that link about the trampoline?
I think I've misplaced that one. Difficult one, that.
Well, very well timed.
Very well timed indeed, definitely. No, but Susan's right. And, when we look at one of my favourite inventions was actually a self-moving sink, which was designed by a little girl whose mum was actually quite poorly and found herself in a wheelchair, unfortunately, and was really struggling to use the bathrooms in the house. And it was an amazing piece of thinking. And to see my engineering team, and this was a group of undergraduate students who worked their socks off to 3D print effectively this movable sink, which automatically sensed how tall somebody was and moved the sink up or down, and the mirror to go with it. It all shifted, which for me, as somebody who's only 5 foot tall, I thought this was the best thing since sliced bread. But the thought that had gone into actually really watching, what was going on in her family and the real struggles that her mother was going through, to turn that into this wonderful piece of kit. But it was also seeing some of my very, very serious engineering academics getting so excited that one of them volunteered to go out and buy matching hand towels for the exhibition. And it just, to me, demonstrated the complete and utter engagement that we'd had from staff across the piece with this project, which was really, really heartwarming.
Yeah, that's lovely. That I know that when I met the child's mother, she was actually quite surprised at the work her daughter had put into the idea, and that she'd been instrumental as the kind of focus for it.
Yeah.
And that's something that we do see quite a bit of parents that are really taken aback by this illustration that the children come up with their idea and the process. That's always quite a surprise at the exhibitions, actually.
Ladies, we have one question and some feedback if you would like to take this as a group. So we have a question from Risa. It says, do you agree that STEM work has to be primarily focused at 10 to 11 years old pupils, as once they move on to secondary, it is too late? And some feedback, you're doing a great job and a lot more has to be taken on board.
Oh. So the question is, do we agree that the STEM work has to begin at 10 and 11?
Primarily focused at 10 and 11, yeah.
I know my answer to that, but I'm going to throw that out to the panel if anybody would like to take that question. Naz?
I think that is a great age range to be focusing on. However, I do feel that it should start a little bit earlier. The reason being is that because it was seen in a couple of studies that by the ages of about 6 or 7, children begin to genderize jobs.
Mm-hmm.
So if you get to the point of about 10 or 11 years old, you know, that kind of underlying bias has already been planted. So at least if there's like a slow progression in terms of that teaching, and then once they get to maybe that 9, 10, 11 stage, it's given a bit more focus, that could be fantastic. It's more that kind of slow progression in terms of learning as opposed to just only showing it to them at that one stage. Yeah, so personally, I think it's good to make sure it started a bit earlier.
Yeah, I agree, Naz, and I think I mentioned it earlier. I think the sooner the better, before those gender stereotypical images come into children's minds, or they see something on telly, the mad professor in the white coat, right? So I think the sooner the better, definitely.
I completely agree. I also think the school system doesn't set them up to, they're thinking about their options as soon as they get in. So if you haven't already got the kind of foundations laid, they're immediately distracted when they go to secondary school, being encouraged to choose their GCSE options. So it's really good if we can get them a bit earlier. We're trying to start at 6 now.
We actually started early years engineer for preschool, and we started that because teachers actually asked for it, and because kids wanted to be engineers. So I think that, yeah, it's that bit of as early as possible from our perspective anyway.
We have a couple more last minute questions now. We had a bit of a slow start, so here we go. From Katie Young, have any of the inventions made it into commercial production?
I think that there are a couple that potentially could. So we have the flat pack wind turbine for refugee campuses going out to Nepal to be piloted and tested. The SMA jacket has certainly gone into the next stages of production. And I think that it depends sometimes on the idea and why it's being built. So I think sometimes it's about the joy of the build rather than the potential for it to become a product that is marketable. So I think that there's a whole range of different inventions, but we do keep track of them, yeah.
Thank you. I'm conscious of time. I don't know whether you want to cover the last 2 questions or whether you want to pick. I'm happy to go back to questions following the webinar. Susan, it's your call. We have one asking about sort of whether inventions reflect current global issues, and another one from Malcolm Dobell asking whether we have sort of evidence of us achieving our aims and the desired impact on encouraging young people into engineering.
So very quickly, in answer to the one about what's going on in the world at the moment, when we saw David Attenborough's Blue Planet first be released, we didn't see an invention that didn't have blue in it. Everybody responded to it. I'm absolutely convinced we'll have lots of solutions to the world's pandemic problems at the moment as the competition deadline approaches, and we can share that. In terms of evidence, the reason we started the master's level course for teachers was to be able to look at action research that was teacher-led, so that we could understand the impact of the programmes that we deliver in the classroom that is independent effectively, as teachers actually then evaluate the impact. In terms of longer term impact, do the children that we work with end up in engineering? Very hard to say, to be truthful, because you can't track children over different education sectors, primary to secondary to college. You've got lots of anecdotal, but that's another project that we're looking at how to resolve going forward.
We have one more question. I don't know whether you want me to separately reply to Robert Rayner. He's actually one of our regional education officers, so I have his email address because we are almost at time.
Okay, yeah, can do that, no problem.
Thank you. Well, I think then we would like to close. Susan, would you like to do your closing remarks, and then I'll do a quick roundup at the end. Thank you.
I'd just like to say thank you to everybody I can't see for joining us. And thank you so much to my panellists, who I genuinely appreciate every bit of help they give us all the time, and their support is amazing. And to those that I cannot see, if you would like to join us in our endeavours, then please get in contact. Thank you.
And just finally, Susan, I think you've said thank you to everybody. I will reiterate thanks. Thank you to everybody for joining, and a big thank you to our panelists, and of course, Susan, for agreeing to come and moderate and liaising with us on this. And I hope everyone has enjoyed today's webinar. Thank you very much for attending.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.